Bienvenidos to Conversaciones con ALPFA New Jersey podcast. Each episode, I, Vanessa Schwippert, will be interviewing different Latinas or allies to share their experiences so that our listeners can be in community with us and hopefully learn a thing or two. Enjoy! At the beginning of every episode, I'm going to be reading the guests' bios. And so I'm going to read yours and we'll start with that. So it says, through your ALPFA board service, Humberto, you created an internship, led volunteer events, established partnerships with other nonprofits, mentored professionals, and executed branding and partnership strategies to establish ALPFA New Jersey as a leading ALPFA chapter. You are also the vice president in the CFO group at Bank of America in real estate finance. In this role, you provide analysis and recommendations that help determine the bank's real estate footprint across the globe. You were born and raised in Passaic, and you are Mexican American and proud of your heritage. So, how does your bio make you feel?
It makes me feel very special. I think listing all of those things or even listening to someone else speak of those accomplishments, I'm like, wow, that's like a really good resume, to build up from.
I love that. What do you think got you to this point, being the president of ALPFA New Jersey and your position with Bank of America?
Yeah, I think it's a culmination of a lot of things. I think it is personal drive, but if I dig deeper, it's a culmination of how I grew up, right? Being a first generation Mexican American, being born in Passaic, New Jersey, which is a very small city, very urban community, growing up in a tough area, building character, being born to two hardworking parents that believed in the hard work and their determination, getting to where you want to be, setting goals for yourself. I think all of that was a culmination that led me to get to this point.
I love that. So, what do you I heard some things that you're saying that you're bringing with you, right? Hard work, determination, goal setting. What may be something that you got from your childhood that maybe you're leaving behind as an adult, or something that you've already left behind?
That's a really good question. I haven't really thought about that. So that's a good one. So I would say I always mention where I grew up at in Passaic, New Jersey. Growing up in that community was everything growing up. Like it was like, oh, I'm from Passaic. This is my identity. This is what makes me. This is the person who I am. But then growing up, I knew in order to benefit my life, I had to think outside of just my neighborhood. So I had to think of how to get better as a person, how to develop skills to get me to the next level as a professional, and just how to think differently. I think leaving the mentality of being a person of your community and thinking bigger, having more of a worldview, I think that was something that I left behind and something that I had to improve in order for me to get to where I am today.
Yeah, I totally agree. As you know, I moved to Texas recently, and I always identified as a North Jersey Latina. Like I am from North Jersey. Like I'm not even like Colombian because when I go to Colombia, right, they're like, "Oh, the gringa, you're from the United States. Like you don't really fit in your home country." And then in New Jersey, I'm like a New Jersey Latina because I see that now when I go to Texas, it's like I'm not a Texas Latina. You know, it's a very specific thing to be from, like you're saying, Passaic or Dover, Wharton, where I'm from, where it's very specific and it was a huge part of my identity. And now that I've gone to Texas and I've kind of broadened my horizons, I feel like that is something that I've left behind too. It's like I'm not just from here. Like there's more to me than just that. And I'm capable of more than just this small town and what the people in the small town do or what's available to us. Like we can branch out. So that's definitely something that I've done as well.
Yeah, no, that's amazing because, right, when you think of it, right, like if we just describe ourselves as your neighborhood or even a city, we're really just putting ourselves in a box, right? We're like caged in. And when you take that away, you can see how much your personality can grow, how you're more open minded to things. It could be as simple as even trying new foods, right? When you travel and you try new foods, it adds to your personality, adds to the culture. It gives you a new sense of identity as well. So I think that's what represents just getting out of your community and growing out of that.
Another question I want to ask is if you, as a child, were you able to be creative? Did you have the opportunity? Did you have that luxury of having downtime and being able to daydream and play?
Yeah, I think I did. Even school, right? As limited as someone may think of school, right? Because, that's the typical thing we hear. For me, it was more like in school, that's where I found poetry. So that's like in third grade, I think, was when I started really getting into poetry, and that was through school. So I think I had the opportunity, right? I didn't really hone that skill until later on when I was a little bit older and I really got into like rap and hip hop. That's when I really got into poetry because I felt like my favorite songs in hip hop and rap, my favorite artists, they were writing poetry. So that's what got me more deeper into it. But yeah, no, I think I've like anybody else, I feel like I did have the opportunity to be creative. I would say maybe expressing that creativity was a little bit more limited, only because going back to what we were talking about earlier, right? Coming from the hood or coming from the ghetto, right? It's like you're a little bit more aware of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable in your neighborhood. So, like, you couldn't scream out, "Oh, I love doing poetry. I like writing about my feelings," right? Because that wasn't really acceptable in the neighborhood. But I think growing up, and once I discovered rap, I figured out another way to express that creativity. So I felt like growing up, I did have that level of expression.
I love that. And I would argue that it's not just like your town, like growing up in the hood. I think it's like being a kid, you really want to fit in. You don't want to do anything to stand out. You don't want to do anything to give others an opportunity to like point at you and laugh, right? So I would imagine if no one is interested in poetry, you're not going to raise your hand and be like, I like poetry because people are going to single you out. They're going to call you corny or whack or whatever it is. It's funny because I don't know exactly which Nas song was the song that showed me that rap was poetry, but there was one song, and I remember being like little in the car because I'm going to age us now. It was the 90s, where I was like in the car and I was listening to Nas, and I'm like, this is like a poem. This isn't just a song that we're singing. It's literally poetry. So I'm glad that in your school that was really like normalized and brought up that because you had an assignment too, right? I remember you telling me that your teacher gave you an assignment to like analyze a song or something. Can you tell me a little bit more of that?
Yeah, no, that's interesting for sure. And by the way, Nas is my favorite artist of all time. I think he's like the best rapper ever. But going back to what you mentioned, yes, it's very interesting. I had a summer assignment going into high school, and this was going from ninth grade to 10th grade. This summer assignment was a very important part of our grade. For me at that time, I never did homework, right? So I never did the summer assignment. But since it was a very important part of our grade, and the teacher that I had really wanted me to succeed, he gave me the option to write about anything. So the first thing that he mentioned was, did you go on vacation? Did you do a summer trip? Because, I would prefer you write and turn in something. So write about that, turn it in, and I'll give you a grade. But right, I'm just a kid from the neighborhood. We don't go on vacations, right? We don't travel. We just stick around, play basketball, and maybe go to the lake and do a barbecue with the family, here and there. So that was a typical summer for me. So I didn't have a summer trip. So then he was like, all right, well, what did you do during the summer? I told him I went, played basketball, and I listened to music. And he was like, oh, what music did you listen to? And there was this rapper. He was also one of my favorites at the time. His name is Cormega. And he said, well, why don't you write about the album you heard and what it meant to you? So I was like, okay. So I started writing. It was a 5-page paper. I think I wrote like 10 pages on this one album because it was, I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. I turned it in and I actually got a really good grade. And that was really the first time where I thought, wow, like, I didn't know you could take something that you really enjoy and make it into like work or like a homework assignment. So I ended up getting a good grade on it. But yeah, that was a really good experience.
That's awesome. I'm glad that you had that experience. And shout out to your teacher because I feel like specifically back in the day, that wasn't common. Like you didn't have teachers letting you write about rap albums. it was frowned upon back then. I feel like that's a very new kind of concept today in school where you kind of, I was a teacher for a few years. And so I did what your teacher did, right? Like, what do you like? Okay, let's focus on that to get you motivated and get you learning. And I feel like your teacher was ahead of his time for that. And I'm glad that you had that experience because that got you into school, right? That got you interested and motivated and progressed and like maybe a starting point a little bit to where you are, maybe.
It did. And I want to talk a little bit about that because it's pretty interesting. So this teacher, right, this was my English teacher in my sophomore year, and it was a freshman level class because I had failed English my freshman year. So I had to retake it. So this teacher was the best thing that could have ever happened to my academic adolescent life because up until this point, right, I wasn't really taking school seriously. I actually didn't even think I was going to go to college, but this was the very first teacher that gave me the confidence to say, "Hey, the skills that you have, you'll be fine if you go to college. You have the skill set to go to college and succeed. Please consider it." And this was also the same teacher that I bonded with. It's interesting because although this teacher was very kind and very creative and very open minded, he was also very strict. I remember one time me and my friend were interrupting his class, and I was like super cool with this teacher. We would give each other daps. We were super cool. But I remember interrupting his class one day, and he was in the middle of like his lecture, and he was so upset. He grabbed a piece of chalk and he threw it at me, and it hit the wall. It hit like it missed me, but it like hit the wall. And I remember that was the first and last time I ever interrupted his lecture.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because even someone like that, I understood at a very young age what that meant. That really didn't mean just shut up and listen to me, right? That man was teaching me a lesson. Like, when you're in my class, right? You're going to respect the time that I have with you because what I'm trying to do with you is I'm trying to teach you or I'm trying to get you to the next level. So I really respected that from him because he wasn't lenient in that way. He took his job very seriously. And again, this was the teacher that first told me, I could go to college. He would give me different books to read. He tried to challenge me as well. I was reading different books outside of the class's curriculum because he wanted to challenge me. He wanted to really mold me to become a better person and better academically. So I really appreciated that. But I thought that was a very interesting story. And as you can tell, he had a very good impression on me because I still remember that, like it was yesterday.
I love that. And like, should he have thrown the chalk? Maybe not. Maybe there was another way to get that point across, but I'm sure him as a human too, right? Like he cares about you and he saw something in you and he thought that you guys had this like rapport or whatever, this relationship. And here you are interrupting him. Like as a teacher, I feel him. Like I totally get that because yeah, you just feel like you do so much and then they're interrupting you mid sentence. It's like, what's up? But you guys are kids and like as an adult they're supposed to understand. That's good. I'm glad that you had that positive relationship. Okay, so how do you think being Mexican American or Latino, how do you think that impacts how you show up in the workplace or with Alpha or just in your personal life in general?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is really the chip on my shoulder, right? Just being like an underdog, maybe having to go through adversity, right? My both of my parents don't speak English. They migrated to the US in the late 70s. They migrated to a very small community with very little Hispanics at the time, and they had to really adjust and assimilate to the new culture. So I think when it comes to the opportunities that I've gotten, I've always taken advantage of them because I know that, there were far too few and in between related to my parents. They didn't have the opportunities I have. So it just makes sense for me to take advantage of all of it, right? Being able to take advantage of the opportunities that I had or have is really a testament of giving thanks to my parents for their sacrifice, their dedication, and even their upbringing. But then even for me, like to me, I really enjoy the fact that I'm very unique. I'm very proud of being Mexican American. I know a lot of the rooms that I've been in throughout my career have been really not diverse. I think now is really the time where I'm seeing a lot more diversity in the rooms that I'm in. And I think what sticks out is really the things that make me different: my skin color, my accent, my hair, my eyebrows, the way I look, even the way I pronounce things. I think all of that is something that I'm very proud of, and I try to stick to in everything that I do, whether it's work related, whether it's alpha, whether it's hanging out with my friends. I try to embrace my heritage, my culture, because I think that's also what makes my parents proud.
Yeah, definitely. You want to bring it with you, like you don't want to leave it behind. I That obviously resonates a lot with me too. My grandfather and my mom back in Colombia, they would sell candy during the day, like on the street, and then whatever money they made from selling that candy, they would go to the market and buy vegetables and maybe some rice. Never meat, never chicken, because they just obviously didn't have the money for that. So my mom always says that they were vegan out of like poverty, not out of choice. And so that now, I have this opportunity to be part of Alpha, to do my own podcast on the side as well. We're taking advantage of the opportunities that we have and bringing those experiences with us to kind of like, it empowers me, right? Like, your parents left their hometown, immigrated to a brand new country, don't speak the language, they don't know anything, that they go through all these adversities and they give us so much. Like, my mom has given me everything. It's like I have to bring that experience and that like heritage and that background with me as I continue like on the torch a little bit. Like, you continue on the family legacy. That resonates with me as well.
Yeah, it's incredible, right? Because again, like with my parents, they crossed the border illegally, right?
Yeah.
So they had to, like, I remember my dad, right? My dad was the first one to come to the US because he had an uncle that lived in the States. He lived in the neighborhood that I grew up in Passaic. And essentially what he said was, come here to the States because there's a lot of work. You can work for a year, save money, and then go back home because there's just a lot of money to be made. And the money to be made was more or less like factory jobs, right? Like there was a lot of manufacturing going on in northern New Jersey at the time. So my dad, he traveled by himself. At that time, he already had two kids, two sons, my older brothers, but he still came here to the US by himself illegally. He worked for a year and then he was like, you know what? It makes more sense for my family to come here because the opportunities that I have here, even making $5, $6 an hour, are far greater than the opportunities in Mexico where they were living. So he sent for my family, which is my mom and my two brothers, to migrate to the US so that way they can start a brand new life together. During that migration, man, my mom has some incredible stories how they had to cross the Rio Grande, how they had to trust um, coyotes who were the transporters and documented immigrants from Mexico to the US. And they had to trust them with their lives, essentially, right, to come to the States. So when you think about that, it's like they really literally risk their lives. And I'm going to be scared to take on these opportunities that I have in front of me. No, I'm going to take advantage of the time that I have here because I know the sacrifice that they made in order for me to be here. So it's like, no, if there's an opportunity on the table, I'm going to take it.
Literally, I feel the exact same way. My mom didn't even want to come to this country. She's one of 12 siblings, and my grandparents saved, I think it was like $200, but it was $200 in the 80s. So that was like a lot of money. And it took them years to save that money. And they sent my mom because my mom's older siblings, they all were married and had kids already. So my mom was like toward the lower middle, and they were like, you're not married, you don't have any kids, so you're the one to go to the US. And same thing, she came here, she was undocumented and she didn't speak the language, she didn't know anyone. She lived in Morristown, and she lived in, those homes that are really really big, but you're like renting a room, and then the next room is like a family of four, and then the next room is like a couple, like just like a bunch of people living in that home. My mom did that for several years. She worked three jobs only having 6 hours off a day. So
Wow.
she's supposed to cook, clean, and sleep in those 6 hours. And then, she worked so hard, saved so much money, and she sent money home to bring the next sibling. And then the two of them, when my aunt came, the two of them worked so hard to send money to bring the third one over. And then the three of them worked, and so on until eventually most of us came here. But yeah, you gave me goosebumps when you said that it's like they did that and I'm going to be scared to take those opportunities. Like that defines everything that I'm doing, like with my podcast or just being part of Alpha. Like, you think I'm going to be scared to go to a mixer? My mom came to a whole brand new country and I'm
Yeah.
going to be scared to go like network with.
Like you think I'm gonna be scared giving that speech at the mixer?
No, that's
Like
nothing. That's literally
nothing.
nothing. This is nothing compared to what our families did. And it's not to minimize what we're doing. I think that it gets a little murky, right? Because it's like these things are difficult, right? I left my corporate job. I went to school for 6 years. I spent $100,000 more on my degree and I'm not using it, completely abandoned it. It's these things that we're doing, they're difficult, and that's not to minimize that, but what they have done for us empowers us to continue on to do difficult things. Like, because I don't want to also minimize or dismiss the challenges that we face too, but also doesn't really compare to what they do either. It's complicated and it's just part of being a first gen kid in America.
I agree.
So this is the last question, and this is the question that I am going to ask every single guest when they're on the podcast is, what advice would you give your younger self?
The advice that I would give my younger self would be to take more risks. I feel like at a certain point, I did play it safe. A local kid, Northern New Jersey, went to a local school, right? So that's probably one of the biggest changes I would have made. I went to a much bigger school, maybe in California or even overseas. I went to a local school, which I don't regret, but if I had a chance to do it all over again, I would go for a bigger school, maybe even outside of the country. And then even the jobs that I've taken, there were times where I could have taken some opportunities that were totally left field, but I didn't, right? So I'm curious to know exactly how that would have turned out. I think without even deciding maybe I should have taken this step or that step, I would have just said I would set out to take out more risks, whether it's going to a bigger school or even taking opportunities that were bigger, but were a little bit more creative. I would go back and take those opportunities. So, in essence, also the advice that I would give any young professional that's still navigating through their school and trying to figure out what they want to do is it's very easy to say, I want to do this. And then in 5 years, I want to be here. And in 10 years, I want to do that. The advice that I would give to anyone going through that process is also, I would tell them to also leave room for creativity and to leave room and be open minded to different changes or opportunities that they might come across that seem out of the left field, because it's those opportunities that might change the trajectory and ultimately set that person up for even bigger success than what they can imagine.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I feel like this idea that we have that you go to college, you graduate, and you have this career for the next 30, 40 years or whatever, I feel like that's outdated. I think the data has shown us that the only way to make like financial progress is by making those switches between companies or between positions. You're not going to make a lot of money staying in the same job for the next, 30 years. So just financially even, it makes a lot of sense to make those changes and dream a little bit bigger. So I definitely agree with that. What I would tell my younger self is I would tell myself to network. I just started networking last year when I was 31, mostly because a teacher, and so I didn't need to network. I I knew my skill. I had my skill. I had a resume. As a teacher, you just apply to jobs and you go to a different school. Maybe that's the type of progress that you make. But I think that that was like a really big mistake, because just because right now you're content with your position or your life or your quality of life, everything, you never know what the economy is going to be like next year. You never know if a pandemic is going to come and shake things up. you don't really know what the future is going to hold. So I wish that I would have been networking all throughout my 20s, because I think that was a really missed opportunity. Because when I did want to leave teaching, it was almost like I was starting at zero. I was starting where college graduates were starting, even though I graduated 5, 6 years earlier. And so that's a lot of people, a lot of connections that I didn't have that could have helped me in my career and progress in that way. So that was a mistake that I made, but that is something that I would have told my younger self. And that is something that I tell other people. I was just talking to an ALPFA board member last night, and they were like, I don't know what my goal is with the convention. And I'm like, get a new job. Like, not that you're gonna get a new job, not that you're it's gonna happen, but having that practice of speaking highly of yourself, telling people what you want, knowing what type of career that you want, these are good practices to have. And so going to the convention, which I know when this airs, it would have already happened, but knowing what you want and talking about it and advocating for yourself, that's something that we should just be doing all the time. And that's something that you do through networking. So that's the advice that I would give to myself, anyone in life. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good advice.
Thanks. Okay, cool. Well, that's it. That's the end of the episode. Thank you for being on, Mr. President Humberto. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. And I know you're going to have a lot of success with this podcast.
I'm excited to see what you do with ALPFA New Jersey and your career as well. Like, I'm excited to see what your future holds too. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Conversaciones con ALPFA New Jersey podcast. For more information on today's episode, please take a look at the episode description below. For updates, resources, and future events in the area, please follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at alpha_NJ. You can also follow and subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify at Conversaciones con Alpha NJ. Gracias, and see you next month.